calendar items. Next, we'll be moving to Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones for our monthly budget report.
Morning, Chair Huntsman, morning, board members. This is the monthly budget report. The Utah State Board of Education continues to be financially stable and able to meet all of its commitments and obligations for the closure of state fiscal year 20. And by way of the budget process and approvals that you made, we look good going into state fiscal year 21. Of course, this is all subject to change with the circumstances that are going around right now. It won't change that we're not financially stable, but budgets could change. There could be alterations in funding. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Jeff, I think you're still driving. Could you pull up the backup, please? No, it should have been the board's budget. No, okay, that's okay. So I'll make sure to send out to you the board budget so that it's all the board's budget, but within the whole budget is the board-centric budget that has identified discretionary funds from balances used that were taken from the legislature, then given back. I've received several questions from board members about, what's the way forward with those balances. The plan is that, as you know, and I'm sure most of you have heard, if not all of you have heard, that there's likely going to be a special session again, another special session sometime this month. As we progress towards that special session, I did talk to Chair Huntsman, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. That's the time when we'll address all the carried forward balances along with our closure balances from state fiscal year 20 with the legislature, depending on what actions they deem necessary or support they feel is necessary, and vice versa, resulting also from the recent tax filing, on July 15th, as we proceed into, getting those actual numbers and getting that all clearly defined about where we landed as far as income tax revenue goes from 2019. So with that, Chair Huntsman, I defer to you for any questions or concerns from board members about our budget. I don't hear Chair Huntsman.
There you go. I'm not seeing any hands up right now, but
okay.
I'll keep.
Okay, the next one is the board's Chair, if I may, I can progress to the discretionary funds. Yeah. The discretionary funds remain, there's been no changes. Again, we just point out that there are balances remaining in the upper right-hand corner. There's the federal mineral lease, the land exchange, and dedicated credits that could also be put to use, allowably, of course, and staff are prepared to advise any board member or any other staff member on potential ideas for the use of these funds. Chair, that concludes my update on the board's discretionary funds, pending any questions or concerns by board members.
I'm not seeing any hand raised. Board member Lear.
Okay.
Question for Scott.
Okay. Getting some echoing.
What? Yeah, I turned off my cooler. What happens to those amounts if they are not spent by the end of the year? Do they roll over? Are they swept? Just help me.
Yes, ma'am. In most cases, and Deborah can correct me if I'm wrong, most of our money is what's categorized as non-lapsing balances. So, while they can be swept or could be swept, typically they are not. Although with the circumstances with COVID, there was some, initial sweeping of money, but the money came back to us, for budget adjustments. But for the most part, I don't see any risk of the federal mineral lease, the land exchange, or dedicated credits being swept if we don't use them. We should, we should proceed with plans to execute the funds. Having the balances is not always a good thing, when, you know, there are potential uses of the funds, but I don't anticipate any risk of them being swept if we don't use them in the near term. But if we, you know, go year after year without, you know, finding, but you can also see though that we have put to good use the initial balance of, for example, the FML. See how it was close to $1 million, and then we're just right now we're down to 182,000. So, you know, we're doing our due diligence. We certainly are. So, short answer to your question, ma'am, is no. I don't anticipate any sweeping of any funds.
Thank
You have a
you.
follow-up?
Thank you.
All right.
Nope.
All right. Not seeing any
That
other hands.
concludes the monthly. Oh, sorry, sir. That concludes the monthly budget report.
Okay, thank you. Next, we'd like to invite, under our item number 7, it's an actionable item under the use of CARES Act funds, Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones and Sarah Young, Director of Strategic Initiative. Scott or Sarah, I'm not sure which one you're going to take point.
Chair, if it's okay, this is Scott. I'll tee it off.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Now there should be an actual backup to this, which is a memo requesting the board's action on request for use of the funds. Jeff could pinpoint that one. There we go. Also, if you could go down a little bit further to that Utah ESSER 60-day report final, Jeff. Okay, so for board members, you know, I'm not going to go through this whole report, but we are subject to reporting the use of these funds. And essentially, you know, we started out with a certain amount with the ESSER funds. And then within the ESSER funds, there's what's called the SEA reserve. So it was 10% of the roughly 67 million we received from the ESSER funds. So 6.7 million. Part of the 6.7 million has been reported for use. If you scroll down a little further, Jeff, you can see where we started to break. Well, stop. With the budget categories, you know, there was initial set aside by the board of $2,075,000. That's been put to good use, as reported by the superintendent, and all the LEAs are appreciative of all the materials, basically, you know, masks that have been sent to them. There was this contractual LEA-based funding. So basically that left a balance of $3,926,458. So Jeff, if you'll go back up to the memo. So within that remaining balance, we're looking at, or we're respectfully requesting that the board set aside an additional $1,500,000 for the purpose of continuation of the provision of PPE. So basically supply chain management, replenishment type activities if necessary, driven by, you know, the excellent duo of Sarah and Zach, and then $600,000 for covering the cost of additional licensing for the early intervention software program. This we feel is an allowable use as well. It's basically because of the impacts of the situation that we're in right now. And then, you know, a small amount for a facilitator to assist in conducting a school counselor training. The training is conducive to, you know, everything and anything that's going on. You know, we're always concerned about students and their mental health and their social economic type aspects. And so we look for value in the school counselor training. With that, I'll just pause and see if Sarah wants to jump in and add any additional, you know, information for your consideration along these three. Sarah, do you have anything?
Thank you,
Sarah, do you have
Deputy. Oh, thank you, Deputy Jones and Board Chair Huntsman. Sarah Young, Director of Strategic Initiatives. I really think Deputy Jones has done a great job of covering where we are. I definitely think that we are still in a space where there are supply chain restrictions in regards to PPE, and that we can take steps here at the state level to help alleviate some of those pressures at the local level, and continue to procure those hard to get supplies. So thank you for this opportunity to present this request.
So Chair Huntsman, there's two parts to this request. And then also within the ESSER funds is what's called a administrative set aside. So Jeff, if you'll scroll down a little bit further on the memo. So you see where I say in addition to the, no, not that far, back up please. Yeah, in addition to the 10% state reserve of ESSER funds for the Department of Education, we were also authorizing an administrative set aside. That amount is $339,108.93. We feel that it's an allowable use to provide for a administrative secretary position that would support Sarah Young both in the near and long term for oversight and management of the funds in the interests of our LEAs. So two parts to this. We will ask the board that a motion be made for the set aside, the $600,000, the $1,400, and then also for the 10% for the administrative position. I just asked Sarah if she wants to add anything on this particular part of the request on the administrative secretary position. If it's okay, Chair?
Yes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Jones. So the goal of this particular position is really going to be expediting the LEA financial requests associated with their both GEAR and ESSER funding. So basically having an individual who will be able to review those reimbursement requests and get them processed quickly, because we know that those resources are necessary in the field.
Okay. Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones, I've got a question for you. Within the memo, and then I thought it was all inclusive if the board decided not to slice or dice or modify any of this, but the recommended action is that the board approve USBE staff request for the use of the 10% SEA reserve funds. It's a simpler way to say it than get clear down into the weeds and mess it up. Is that?
Yeah, that's yes, sir.
That still gets us in the same.
Yeah, you don't have to. Yeah, if you want to. Yes, sir. Yeah, I mean, we're just making sure we're very transparent with the board, and then ultimately, likely with monitors and auditors on where the money went, how it was identified, and so if you want to just keep it in a general sense, I'm sure.
Okay. Questions, comments from board members? Board member Earl.
Thank you. I'm just curious on the early intervention software program. What are we talking about? Is this a monitor program? Is this a program kids log on to from home? Is this something within the school? What specifically is this addressing?
So this is Sarah Young. I'm happy to provide a quick overview, although I do know we have experts in teaching and learning who oversee this program. This is actually an existing program that we have for early intervention software for K through 3. We have found that in this particular program, there is an exceeding number of requests coming in for schools to be able to participate in this state resource beyond what we had previously seen. So this particular allocation of funds allows for that software to be funded for the schools that have requested it for their students and teachers.
Did you have a follow-up, board member Earl?
No, that covers it. I just was curious exactly which vendors we were looking at and what exactly this covered. So thank you.
Okay. Board member Hanson.
Just a question on the administrative position. Is that a multi-year position or a permanent position? I'm just wondering how far that funding would be spread. And then I do have another question after this one.
Okay.
Thank you, Board Member Hanson. So this would be a time-limited position. So would be specific when we posted it for application for employment through September 30th of 2021, which is when our CARES funding is authorized through. So we would be very clear about that upon hiring and make sure that we're transparent with the individuals who might be interested that this is time-limited.
You had a follow-up, Board Member
follow
Johnson or
follow up on that one. So that amount of funding then we expect would be expended in a year?
Thank you. That is a great question. So at this point, we do not believe that that specific single position is going to fully utilize all of this funding. But the approval would allow for, once we get that individual in, can kind of scope out what the workload looks like in regards to these reimbursement requests. Right now, the focus of our office has been specific to approving the plans, which is something that I've been handling in partnership with Jacob Wright with the Governor's Office for Gear. We also have our federal programs leader, Becky Donaldson, and her staff leading out on ESSER. This individual would look to take on that load beyond or into the reimbursement space, and basically gives us an opportunity to see what that looks like in regards to needs for additional staff and support to make sure we're quick about those responses for reimbursement.
Okay. Do you have additional questions?
I do. I think I see Superintendent Dixon's hand raised. I don't know if that's on this particular question, but.
Superintendent, you want to weigh into this, Superintendent Dixon?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, even though this is administrative set aside, that this is not an administrative position. So I want to make sure everybody's clear about that, that it's an assistant, it's a support position to really take off this burden of all of the operational pieces to procurement and some of those items that Sarah has graciously added on. I think we've given her 4 hours to sleep a day. So I just want to make sure that everybody knows it's not an administrative position.
And then just to follow up, then I'm having a hard time understanding how one assistant is going to, even fully burdened in a year, is going to amount to $339,000 expended. Can someone help me understand that? Or is there's going to be excess funds from this? How much of that do we plan to spend on this administrative person?
Yeah, I'm looking for a staff hand that wants to respond. Scott, do you have a response to that? The board member.
No, sir. Yeah, I would defer to Sarah for the response to that question.
Okay.
She has the lead on this.
Thank you, Board Member Hanson. So in regards to the specific costs that we're looking at specific to this individual role, we would be looking at around $150,000 to $160,000, depending on how quickly that individual could start, both salaries and benefits included within that specific space. So the reason we are requesting the additional authorization beyond that one position is that we just note that that one position may not be able to meet those field needs in the way that we expect. So an option would potentially be we could either authorize the full amount to be able to then do a quick response to that as opposed to waiting for a board meeting. Or it's certainly, feasible to authorize the single position at the $160,000, and then we could come back to you with additional requests as we see fit once we kind of get a scope associated with that initial workload.
You have a follow-up, Board Member Hanson?
I do, thank you. So on that particular item, I am not in favor of a motion that allows just a blanket $340,000 without more clarification. So wouldn't be in favor of that. I do have questions about the other usage of the funds and wondered how we determined to use the 1.5 for additional PPE and the 600,000 for the software in lieu of maybe some other competing demands. I know that we bought thermometers with some of the money. There's probably a need for additional thermometers. There are some other potential uses like room air purification, maybe if it needs to be provided for our classrooms. How did we get it down to these items? How is that selection made?
So this is Sarah Young. I'm happy to respond.
Thank you. Sarah.
So in regards to these specific use cases, I would be clear that 2 of them came very specifically from staff to address an immediate need that they were seeing in relationship to both the school counselor training as well as the need for the software licenses to be available at the start of the school year. Those were brought through USBE leadership and then to your plate in terms of being able to consider them for specific uses. The first one in regards to the additional PPE. So one of the things that we are certainly aware of is that the needs for PPE continue to evolve and shift. And we are reaching a point where we will have used all of the initial $2 million that was funded for state action within that space. To the question about thermometers, I'd just like to clarify that we do still have non-contact thermometers available at the State Board of Education that we have been issuing to schools based on their requests and their needs as they've been identified. And so that is really the goal, is to be able to have that authorization to be able to respond to the field needs specific to PPE requests as those really start to become clarified as we move forward with the potential reopening of the school year.
And the reason then for the PPE specifically is because of the supply chain difficulties that we're seeing. Is it easier for us to get that than it is for the individual districts?
That is correct. So we have, through Zach Christensen, our Director of Purchasing, had the opportunity to work with Utah State Purchasing to gain access to supplies that are available to larger entities and more consortium style procurements just based on size. And so I would really point to our disinfectant wipes that are on their way. That is something that is hard to come by, whether you are shopping at your individual grocery store or looking online. And so by the state acting in that procurement space, we were able to gain access to materials that weren't going to be available to our local entities.
Thank you, Chair, if it's okay. Thank you. That helps me to understand. I think that's a really good criteria for deciding what we should buy as a state entity versus the LEAs, where there's funding on both sides. Trying to decide who buys what can be difficult, but where we have an advantage, I can see that that would make sense. So thank you for that.
Okay, Board Member Belknap.
Thank you, Chair. I have a couple of questions, and so if that's all right.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. One, I want to piggyback on something that Scott said. I actually am kind of taken that an administrative assistant is going to receive $160,000 in a year. I just that's a sidebar. I don't know that anyone has an explanation for me of that. But I want to go to early intervention software. Sarah, you said there are different software. So number one, what is the software? And number two, is it available to all students throughout the state if a school requests it?
Thank you. I'm happy to follow up with you and any of the other board members specifically about the cost potentially for that staff. We haven't hired that individual yet. And so the estimate I'm giving it is exactly that, an estimate. And once we have that individual with their expertise, I'll be able to give you something more concrete and specific. So I appreciate that question. In regards to EISP, I do know that we have some of our experts from teaching and learning, specifically the digital teaching and learning team, who could probably better speak to the individual program as well as the access to that program. So, Chair, if it's possible.
Jennifer Swanston got her hand up, so I think.
Great. Thank you so much.
Go to Jennifer.
So Jennifer, while you're getting ready and getting your mic off, it's also a grant program. I just want to know that too.
Absolutely. This is Jennifer Thronson, Director of Teaching and Learning. So this is a grant program in that each LEA and school applies for the funding. At this point, we are over expenditures in terms of applications versus actual dollars available. And so given that this provides early reading software for our students in K through 3 in our schools, we really would like to meet the demand, knowing that remote learning and the opportunity to engage in learning online may be extremely valuable this year. And so being able to meet the demands of applications and what they're looking to provide for their students is just a little bit short, and the $600,000 would allow us to grant all applications the request that they have made. So that is the request for the $600,000, which is to cover the gap between applications received and current fiscal amount that we have available.
What's the software, Jennifer?
We have 4 different ones. We have iReady, Imagine Learning, Lexia, and there's one more, but I can't remember. Oh, Waterford.
Okay. Is it the Rusty and Rosie program?
That is that's the Upstart program. So they've got
Okay,
pre-K. This is the Waterford.
Oh, the Waterford itself. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Chair. I have one more question.
Okay, one more, and then we've got another board member on deck.
Okay, we're talking here about a problem here to get PP&E for our schools, but there's also a big problem trying to get computing devices for our schools. Zach, have you worked at all with any procurement or through UEN or anywhere to get computing devices for the schools from support from our level?
That's a question for Zach. Is he available to come on?
Yes, Chair Huntsman.
Okay, thank you.
If I am. Board Member Belknap, this is Zach Christensen, Director of Purchasing and Contracts. We haven't been looking at any additional computer devices with this funding. That's not been a request we've had so far, but that is something that if you would like, we can look at and see what we can find and what's available.
Okay, Zach, I'll talk to you on the sidebar. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Board Member Lear. I thought I saw Board Member Lear's hand.
Yes, I'm here. Sorry. A question going back a little bit for Sarah Young. You mentioned thermometers, and this may be beyond your knowledge or scope of information or job responsibilities, but Sarah, do you know who will be using those thermometers? Are they intended for classroom, teachers, employees? School hasn't started for the most part, so maybe we don't know, but do you have any anticipation of the purpose of those?
Thank you, Board Member Lear. So at this point, the thermometers have been provided to an individual school site. So really making sure that we have at least one non-contact thermometer per building. USBE expert Betty Sue Hinken put out a survey to the field to her school nurse colleagues and was able to bring back information demonstrating that about 50% of our schools did not have non-contact thermometers available to them on site when this particular pandemic started. So we're really just trying to be proactive about making sure that we have a bare minimum of one non-contact thermometer on site and haven't gotten into specific details or recommendations about who at the school is going to be using that supply, mainly making sure that it's available if that use case is identified.
Thanks. Brief follow-up, Chair?
Yes, Board Member Lear.
And I just lost my train of thought on my follow-up. And there's some probably lack of information among the administration and the USBE possibly, but do you know if the LAA plans usually talk about use of thermometers? I'm not thinking what you just explained is excessive. I'm just trying to get a picture of if they really will be used. Do you know if the plans included how and if they'll be used?
I can speak to that if you'd like me
Yeah,
to.
Superintendent, yeah, I was looking to see if, I figured your hand would be raised.
Yeah,
Superintendent.
we'll talk about our plans definitely this afternoon, but in general, thermometers was not one of the requirements of the template, but we have seen that played out as they talk about mitigation tactics. So we'll discuss that more in the afternoon. But that, again, that wasn't one of our requirements, but you'll see it in a lot of the plans.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments on this particular item?
One quick one, Chair. I don't know if it's anything.
Okay, Board Member Hanson.
Just I put it into the chat, but not sure if everyone can see that. What's the impact if this is pushed out for another month so that we could understand the LEA plans and needs maybe a little bit better before we allocated these funds?
I guess the question is time sensitive, and Sarah Young or Scott, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, if I may, Chair, can I address Board Member Belknap's question about the 160,000? That is both salary and benefits. So, you know, based on market analysis and what we need from a particular individual to come in and, you know, assist in this big lift, then, you know, it's a combination of both salary and benefits. So you're looking at a salary range of, you know, I would say maybe somewhere between 80 to 90, and then, you know, benefits. And we always try to maximize it. Plus, you know, any travel or, you know, so that's where that comes from. But, you know, to Sarah's point, we can look at that again. We really do need some additional capacity and lift in this area, you know, especially since the decision was made to, you know, be the conduit, if you will, for supplies and materials out to the LEAs. It's quite a big lift. The other, what was the second question, Chair Huntsman, or Board Member Hanson's question? Could you repeat that again? I didn't quite hear that.
It was about time sensitivity.
Yeah, so there is a time sensitivity. I mean, we don't want to rush to failure, you know, on, you know, by any means, but, you know, there is an expectation by the federal government that this money will get spent in a time frame. And Sarah, can you jump in with that time frame as far as what expectations are as far as getting the money executed allowably? I think that might help.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Jones. So as you can reference in our 60-day report, that they are asking, sorry, there's a bit of an echo. I apologize.
You better mute a few mics.
Thank you. So in our 60-day report, the U.S. Department of Education did ask us to report on the status of our existing funds, and specifically where those had been allocated in regards to meeting individual needs. They're also asking for a status on the current administrative funds, and again, the use case associated with that effort. So this is part of a continual reporting mechanism that we have with the U.S. Department of Education, both to keep them informed about how we're using those funds, and then as well potential use cases associated with additional funds that may be necessary to fund needs within the field. So we are doing our best to be responsive and be timely in regards to making sure that those funds are going to specific actionable cases, as well as demonstrating potential needs that the state may have in regards to additional funding that could be available for K-12 in a CARES style response.
Chair Huntsman, does that answer questions, or are there any more questions or concerns?
Well, I guess the question is, can this be postponed until next month, as other things are being assessed for needs of opening of these schools? I guess I think that's where Board Member Hanson's last question was about. Is there an urgency to have this passed today? And so, Sarah, is there urgency today, or what is, or Scott?
Can I answer that?
Chair, Superintendent Dixon's raising her hand.
Okay, Superintendent Dixon.
Can you hear me all right?
Dixon. Superintendent?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I guess for me, the reason I'm passionate about this is the urgency. This is the time of the really heavy lift. We put it off. We're trying to get things out to schools and be helpful to schools. And that's why we need this now. To put it off a month, it just means that we continue to burden Sarah. She's not going to advocate on her behalf. We're pushing this because we watch the hours that she's working, the additional duties that we've given to her and others in the office. We're all working long hours. We need this help now. And that's why we're bringing it before you.
Okay, that answers that question. Board Member Belknap, hands raised.
Yes, Chair, are we ready for a motion?
Yes.
Thank you. I would like to make a motion that we approve this request with a change to the 339,000. I'll make this better and cleaner, okay? With change from the 339,000 to authorize for a position by title and align it with other similar positions in our office in the amount. Okay, so in other words, what I want to do is take the 339,000 they hire for that position, and the other is the other piece of money is funneled back. And I'm not quite sure the best way to say that.
Okay.
Angie, help.
And somebody's going to throw it up on the or place it on the screen
Roll up.
to make that
I
attempt.
apologize. What was the question? Again, I was working on another motion for another agenda item behind the scenes.
It's not a question, Angie, but I'm making a motion to approve the use of these funds with the exception of the 108, whatever, to have that be the amount for an authorized position to be an administrative assistant that's by title and align it with the similar positions that we already have in our office. So I'm not sure how to say
Would it be better to read that the board approve USBE staff request for the use of the 10% SEI reserve funds with the exception that the $339,000 be changed to, we're better off dealing with numbers. It's a budgeted amount.
And change it to 160,000 then.
Well, but there's some incidentals that get attached. You might want to say 180 or something of that nature. And if it doesn't get spent, then we make adjustments. But it depends on how many times you want to come back and
Because it's
micromanage
not
this
just for
position and
one
expenses.
person. It's
Yeah.
not just for one person. It's for the other things that they're going to use that person for.
Yeah, I get that. So you want to leave it at 160 as your motion?
Well, Sarah said that included the incidentals.
Scott went to the Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones and said, are we safe with that number? Scott, or are we going to be coming back?
Yeah, I think so, because, it's also inclusive of the ICP as well. Ultimately, the market's going to determine the quality of applicants that come in, for Sarah and others to vet. So I think we initially go with the board's, direction at 160,000. Then we can, post the position and go from there. If, for whatever reason we don't feel that there's sufficient candidates or things like that, we can always come back to you.
So would that be your motion? Are you satisfied with how the motion is written on the screen? Board Member Belknap?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, we have a motion from Board Member Belknap that the board approve the USBE staff request for use of the reserve funds to support the development, implementation, and reporting of CARES Act funding and amend the amount for an administrative position from $339,108.93 to $160,000. Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second that, Chair Huntsman, Mark Marsh.
Okay. Did you want to speak to your motion, Board Member Belknap?
I'll waive.
Okay. Vice Chair Brittany Cummins, discussion to the motion.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm assuming that the $339,108.93 is a number based on what's available for an administrative set aside. I'm assuming that's where that number came from. If that money is, sorry.
We lost you, Vice Chair Brittany Cummins.
Okay, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
If that money isn't spent, that administrative set aside isn't spent in that way, what else can that money be used for?
Chair, I'll take a shot at answering that question. So my understanding is that it's intended strictly for administrative use. It's a certain percentage of the overall balance that, is clearly designated to be used in an administrative fashion. I think the risk then of not using that money up to that amount for that intended purpose is that we would give the money back to them. I don't think it's a matter of, we can repurpose it, and use it later. It's pretty clear to me, and Sarah's welcome to jump in here as well. Pretty clear to me that that's the intent, is that it all get used towards, administrative purposes, hiring a position or, helping support the overall direction of the state of the SEA. So does that answer your question, ma'am, through the chair?
Yes, it does. Sorry, am I echoing? Sorry.
Yes.
Okay. So yes, that answers my question, and then it leads to me. So I would like to make a motion to amend to remove anything after "and." So put a period after CARES Act funding. And so, sorry, I'll let that. And if there's a second, I'd like to speak to that, Chair.
I'll second that, and without objection, I would be happy to have that be the motion.
And may I speak to that, Chair?
Brittany, can you speak?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. So the reason why is this money was set aside for administrative purposes. They've come to us and said they would like to hire at least one administrative position. And I think the numbers seem high and inflated. It's just a guesstimate based on what it would cost to hire somebody, plus benefits, plus everything else that it costs to employ an individual. And so I don't think they're going to overpay anyone just because the money's available. I think we make the full amount available for the flexibility of the administration to meet the needs of this particular fund, so we can get the supplies and the money to LEAs as quickly as possible so that we don't create an administrative burden or a bottleneck at our end of this. And so I would like to approve the full amount for the flexibility of the administration so they don't have to return or wait for another board meeting in order to move forward with the needs that they have at that level. Thank you.
Okay. So I have a question to Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones. That $339,000 that set aside can also be used by other existing staff, all if it meets the criteria that's there to support the use of these funds. So it could be a part of or action taken from Sarah Young or other people all can pull from that side of the funding. Am I correct in stating that?
Yes, as long as, there's criteria on what the word administrative means, right? So, we would, we'd obviously, make sure to whatever action it is, like to your point, does meet that criteria. So,
yes.
So yes, yeah.
Which we're already, USBE is carrying the burden and has been carrying the water on all the expenses for everything that's happened as a result of this funding source. So we haven't been using that set aside. So the way I see it. Okay, discussion to the proposed amendment. Board Member Belknap, your hand's still up for more discussion.
Yeah, I just wanted to make one comment on this. I'm thinking that maybe it was such a red flag that it just says that it's administrative position. It's actually administrative money to use how they need to use it in the administration. I think that's where the red flag came from.
Okay. So we have a proposed amendment on the table here. Not seeing any further discussion. The proposed amendment is to have.
Sir, this is Scott.
Yes.
I'm sorry, sir. For clarification, so I'm getting texts from my staff saying that if we don't use the administrative money, we can use it for other purposes. So I was incorrect in saying that. So I just want to make sure I clarify that back with Chair Cummins or Vice Chair Cummins that I thought that we would have to, that it's specifically supposed to be used for admin funds. And now I've been corrected that it can be used for other purposes. So I it's important, I think, that I clarify that.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Vice Chair Brittany Cummins, your hand's raised.
I thank you for that clarification. I appreciate that. I would like to leave the amendment as is and allow the administration to use up to that amount as needed. And then if they want to refunnel those possible administrative costs into some other ways that we can send that out to people, that they would come up with those ideas as well. So I still support moving forward with the full amount, up to that full amount for administrative needs.
Okay, the proposed amendment that's before the board is the first motion that reads that the board applies the USBE staff request for use of the reserve funds to support the development, implementation, and reporting of CARES Act funding and amend the amount for an administrative position from the $339,000 to the $160,000. Both amendment takes away the part that says, and amends the amount for an administrative position from the 339,000 to 160. So the new motion would read, with this amendment in place, or the amended motion would read, if this amendment passes, that the board approve the USBE staff request for use of the reserve funds to support the development and implementation and reporting of CARES Act funding. Okay, that's the proposed amendment. All those in favor of the amendment, please vote. The proposed amendment passes with the yes votes of being Mark Huntsman, Vice Chair Brittany Cummins, Board Member Thorpe, Board Member Gravitt, Board Member Belknap, Board Member Lear, Board Member Cannon, Board Member Davis, Board Member Newell, Board Member Haynes, Board Member Marsh, Board Member Bolter, and the nays are Board Member Earl and Board Member Hanson. The proposed amendment passes. So the amended motion that's before the board, so I guess at this time we'll undo our votes here. The proposed motion before the amended motion before the board is that the board approve the USBE staff request for use of the reserve funds to support the development, implementation, and reporting of CARES Act funding. Any further discussion to the motion? Board Member Earl?
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I guess I just want a clear understanding of where the money's going and who it's going to. And I don't know that that needs to be now, but as we move forward and see the needs, will that information come back to the board as that money is used? That's my question.
So this would be a question to Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones on our budget side. And as we have our monthly reporting, will the board be able to see how that money is being spent on the administration side and how much and where those balances are? Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones.
Yes, sir. So to Sarah's earlier point, we're required to report to the federal government. So we would just make that inclusive of updates to you. If you go to the agenda item for this, you can see the reports that have been made already to the federal government. So to Board Member Earl's question, you know, there's room for full transparency here. You would receive the same updates, know exactly who was hired for how much, what items are purchased, all of those different aspects. So.
Great, thank you.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions. Board Member Lear?
I do, just a further clarification that I put in the chat and didn't receive an answer from Scott Jones or anyone. If the 339,000 is not used for administrative purposes, of a variety, which you've explained, it returns to the feds. Is that right? Right.
No, ma'am. This is Scott. So, you know, that's one thing that I missed early in my response to Vice Chair Cummins. The 339,000, if it's not used for administrative purposes, can be used for other purposes. The best way to put it is the $339,000 is a ceiling, right? That's the most we can use of this money for administrative purposes. That's the best way I can explain it.
But whatever is not used I'm sorry
Could be
about
used
my
for,
echo. Whatever's not used for any allowable purpose, broader than administrative, would go back to the federal government. Is that right?
well, we could use it, you know, for other purposes. So yeah, anything that's not used at the end of the time that we're allowed to use it would need to go back to the federal government. I
Thanks.
just want to be clear.
That's enough. That's good. Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay, man. Thanks.
I guess based on board member Lear's question is this line item that what we're talking about for administrative purposes, it's a set aside, but we can still revisit it as we see the water get into the row or our time playing out and readjust our budget or readjust this line item. So those dollars could be spent on something else. And I believe that's what you were saying, Scott.
Yes, sir. That's correct. We'll keep you updated and make sure you know exactly what it's going for and what our status is.
Okay. Board member Scott Hansen.
Thanks, Chair. I'll just, am I connected?
Yes.
Okay.
Member Hansen.
I'll just have to speak against the motion that's on the table. I can't vote for anything that says we authorize up to $340,000 for one position. And that's the way I see this request reading. So it's unfortunate. I think we're headed a better direction, but with the motion as it is, just have to speak against it. Thank you.
Okay, the motion before the board, not seeing any other discussion. We're going to be voting on this, and I'll state the amended motion before the board, and that is that the board approve the USBE staff request for use of the reserve funds to support the development, implementation, and reporting of CARES Act funding. All in favor, please vote. The motion passes with one nay vote, and the nay is board member Scott Hansen. Okay. This will end the vote. All right, continuing on to our agenda.